It's 1929. The world is amazing. There are so many dancing people and there's no problems. Then the stock market crashes. So for this game, you get to pick gender. I pick girl because boy looks like he's from a crime flick and I'm not a detective. Girl has a beret and a dress. Many different cultures. Name. Girls back then were named Annie, and I have a cousin named Annie, so I'm gonna go with this. Like, I haven't seen my cousin in years. She might be dead. Anyway, it's 1930, and I'm having trouble finding a job. That may be because I'm a woman, but it also might be because there's no jobs. And in 1931, Al Capone is jailed for tax evasion. Now, most people know Al Capone for being a notorious gangster, but I know Al Capone for having a restaurant at Six Flags. In 1932, FDR wins the election, and this might sound like a shocker, but he has the most elections of any president, being four. The Dust Bowl also strikes many farmers, which leaves many crops destroyed. This is only the first Dust Bowl, as the third one will happen in my grandma's kitchen. In 1934, Hitler becomes the Führer, which just means that he gets to wear the biggest hat and have the silliest mustache in all of Germany. And in 1935, the Neutrality Act is passed to keep the U.S. out of foreign wars. This is ultimately a failure because we joined the war in the 1940s. You're not George Clooney, America. You can't just go back on what you say. In 1936, FDR wins re-election for the second time, and the Spanish Civil War begins. And nothing happens in 1937. 1937 is like my sister. She doesn't exist. In 1938, the Axis powers continue invading with little resistance. Hitler is the protagonist of an anime in this case where he is winning. Likewise, the countries he is invading are kind of like the stage 1 bosses in a JRPG. Now on to the Variety Hour.
Hello. Welcome to the Variety Hour. With me, your host, Rolando. Let's talk about the world scene leading up to the war. Multiple invasions were occurring. Hitler was invading much of Central Europe, Japan was invading much of the east coast of China, and Italy, well, Mussolini was being Mussolini. Hitler continued his rampage through Europe until eventually Britain tried to appease him by giving him a part of Czechoslovakia. In turn, they asked him to stop invading. This did not work. Hitler ended up invading the rest of Czechoslovakia, which was the last straw for Stalin. Stalin had been trying to get the Western powers to aid him in stopping Hitler ever since he came to power, but to no avail. He signed the non-aggression pact with Hitler. The war begins. Hitler continued invading Western Europe, conquering smaller countries and fighting the Allies, Britain, France, among others. Throughout this, much of the U.S. opinion was still very much against sending their boys to another world war, a world war in which they had no stake in. Still, FDR was very much trying to help the Allies in any way he can, and eventually he ran for a third term, in which he won. Hitler decided to betray the USSR. He invaded their western front, tearing through and claiming the heartland. The Japanese Empire had its own plans. Being left out of the loop by Hitler, they had decided they wanted to stop the US in a drastic way, so that they can continue colonizing small islands. This resulted in Pearl Harbor, a horrific attack that ended up leading to US entering the war. Stalin realized he was on his own at this point, and he fought back hard once he realized that. He moved the heartland of Russia more eastward, creating more factories to support the war effort, and eventually came the Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest battle in all of history. Without the Soviets, the Axis powers would have won. So, that hopefully shed a new light onto the World War, a light where America isn't the lone hero that saved the day, but where a different country and all the other countries work together. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully my job is over, because it's lunchtime.
And we're back from the Variety Hour. To end Germany and Italy and its conquests in Europe, America launches troops onto the beaches of Normandy. This is D-Day. This eventually results in the freedom of France and the retaking of Europe. America slapped the shit out of Japan by dropping nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, marking the end of Japan. See, this is why you should always pick Girl Named Annie in the 1930s and 40s. When the boys went off to World War II, guess who needed jobs and guess who was just willing to do them? That's right, women named Annie. And also women named Dorothy and whatever other women existed at the time. World War II ends in 1945. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine begins a fight against communism, basically telling the Reds that we don't like them anymore. Truman, in an upset to the public, is reelected. In 1949, NATO is formed and is still around today, helping to deter forces like terrorism and Russia. However, Bert Kreischer was able to join the Russian mafia in the 1990s, so I'm calling bullshit. All things considered, FDR had a great presidency. He was incredibly great above the waist, and he was great at talking to the country and telling them exactly what state they're in. But when he died in 1945 to polio, thanks polio, he was replaced by Truman. Truman was kind of a loser. He was the kid that would play Pokemon cards in the basketball court while everyone else was playing soccer or football. Truman did believe in the exact same things as FDR, or relatively the same, but he just wasn't as vocal about it. If I had to give the 1930s a rating out of 10, I'd probably give them a 5 or a 6. They were fun and all, with your Great Depression and your New Deal, but there weren't enough assassinations, worst decade. And that is the Charlene Rule Experience.